I get shit done, I have fun, it's my time and I'm the one. I'm breaking through.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business Renovator. What's your water? Our guest is going to explain to us what that really means and how does that help you identify your own bias. And there's the statement she has is, a fish is the last one to know what water is. Think about that for a minute while I bring on our sponsor. Welcome back. If you have ever thought about asking a business coach a question, the good news is I am one of the focal point coaches, business coaches around the world. There's a couple hundred of us. And if you have a question that I can't answer around time, team, money, or exit strategy, I can introduce you to one of our other team members. We'd be happy to help you answer that question that's percolating in your mind. Our guest today, I just want to bring on this. What's your water? Identifying our biases. Bron is from Australia, and the dead giveaway is when she comes on, you'll hear her voice. It's actually quite pleasant. She's discovered that raising awareness around unconscious bias leads to a greater capacity for broader thinking around diversity and difference, which enables leaders to make better informed decisions. Through more than 30 years of experience across the education and not-for-profit sectors, Bron has developed her innate ability to work with people with her capacity to see beneath the surface of circumstances, analyze the drivers behind behavior, and speak to unconscious bias is a phenomenon. So, and she's phenomenal. I've already had a chance to meet and speak with her before you guys did, so I was fortunate. I'm going to bring her on, but I'm going to talk about her personal life a little bit, because some interesting facts that I know of her, because she shared them, is that she's a mother of 3 sons, has 2 daughters-in-law, 6 grandchildren, 5 granddaughters, 1 grandson, ranging in age from 4 to 17. She's also a novice triathlon, done a bungee jump. I've thought about it, but never done it, and she has 2 tattoos. She also has a 6-speed stick on the floor, sports car, and enjoys swimming, yoga, and reading. And I'd like to say welcome.
Thank you, Phil. It's lovely to be here.
So tell me about this concept that you about the fish is the last one to know it's in water.
Yeah, I came across that when I really first started to get obsessive about unconscious bias, and it came out of my own life experience of being confronted with 2 fairly large biases in my life when I was working with the Salvation Army on Nauru, which is a tiny tropical island in the Pacific Ocean. The Australian federal government, in conjunction with the Nauruan government, had reopened the offshore processing centre there and also on Manus Island in Papua New Guinea to process asylum seekers who come to Australia by leaky boats. And the Salvation Army were providing the welfare services. And on the very first day, as I walked down into the camp, I started to have some physical sensations. My body was reacting to this situation, stomach churning, tense shoulders. And I didn't know what was going on. I hadn't experienced my body telling me something. And it took me a little while of reflection to realize my body was telling me that I was afraid. Now, that to me was an odd thing. I was in my mid-50s by this stage, experienced a lot of things in life. But as I reflected on my life and how I'd grown up, I realised that somewhere along the line, I'd been taught that difference was a threat. And so what my body was telling me here was that I was afraid. And I wasn't afraid because these men might hurt me. They were asylum seekers. They'd suffered trauma. And apart from anything else, there's heaps of security guards around. No, my body was telling me I was afraid just because these men were different to me. And I didn't like that. And I realised that that fear of difference indicated a latent racism, a latent racist bias that grew up in me, developed in me, purely because I had spent my life swimming in the water of white Australia. You know, everybody I mixed with, grew up with, was just like me. I hadn't had the opportunity to really mix with people who were very different or spoke different languages or, you know, just different in lots of and many different ways. And then the second thing that occurred was, as I spent more time on Nauru and I started to observe the white expats on the island, I saw that we all had this sense of superiority towards the Nauruans, and that would come out in, you know, just the way we dismissed their ideas, or we spoke over them, or we thought we had better ideas than they did. And I sat down with Fatima, who headed up the Nauruan team for the Salvation Army, and told her what I'd been observing. And she just said, "Oh, we know that about you guys, but we just accept it." That floored me because, you know, what I had observed, she was telling back to me. And as I reflected on that, read some more, I came across the term white privilege, and I realised that's where that sat, that sense of superiority that, you know, a white person, developed country, university educated, of course we knew better. Of course I knew better. So they were two quite personal experiences. There were things I didn't like about myself. You know, I would have said I didn't have a racist bone in my body. But as I came home from that experience, started to read, I came across that that little saying that a fish is the last one to know what water is. And I thought, I love that. I love stories. I love metaphors. That for me was so helpful in understanding, right, I'm a bit like that fish. I've been swimming in this water of superiority, white privilege, latent racism all my life, and I didn't know it, but now I do. So what do I do about it?
Which brings me to like my experience and the labels that I've been introduced to around bias, and that are scotomas. And the scotomas, we have them in all 5 senses, and they are in, I guess, programmed in us from the time we're either conceived or come into the physical place, and then for about 0 to 7 years, we're like not wet sponges, but dry sponges, and we just absorb everything without rationalizing anything. And I know that I, as a young feller, I said some things that were in the right context, were the right, but that were very nasty things to say. I didn't understand the nasty part of it, but I got reprimanded, rightfully so. And as I went through my own journey, I recognized that I have scotomas as well. And even though I know this today, I still have them in certain areas. And I think you said that our biases, using your language, are there. You still have some. You're just at a different place in relationship to them. Would that be fair to say? In regards to biases, you had mentioned in an earlier conversation to me, is that you and I still have bias or scotomas, but we have a heightened awareness. So
Yes.
You haven't necessarily gotten rid of your biases, but you've moved away from them. Was that right?
Yes, that's true. Because people often ask me, "Oh, can we eliminate bias?" And I say, look, I think the short answer is no, because it's part of how we think and has been so deeply ingrained in us in childhood. But once we have some awareness around bias. And that's why my tagline is making bias conscious.
Right.
Once we have that consciousness of them, awareness of them, we get to choose, what do we do with this now? Do I continue to act out of that biased way of thinking, or do I flip it on its head? And for me, particularly around my racist bias, I went from looking at difference as a threat to seeing it as an asset. Because I see now that, if we've got a wide range of people in a situation, we're going to get a lovely lot of different viewpoints, and I'm going to learn some things, and we can make better decisions. And from a leadership point of view, it's about understanding that our understanding about biases is a real silver bullet for our businesses in terms of being able to really hit the mark on when we're concerned about our decisions, we're not making the progress we want to in business. It may well be because we've got some unconscious biases that are influencing our decision making, and understanding about that can just really open up a whole new way of thinking, a whole new world.
And you reminded me of something. You said something earlier and I laughed. You were talking about how naive you were. That's not what you said, but that's what you were because your peer said, "Oh yeah, we know that about you guys, right?" Right?
Yeah.
So I was laughing because how naive are we to think that people aren't aware of what we are, whether we're racist or not, right? People are aware.
Absolutely. And when I do webinars and presentations, nearly every time someone will say, but what can I do about my managers, my co-workers, my partners, you fill in the blanks, their biases. And that always makes me laugh because we can see other people's biases much more readily than we can see our own. And of course, I say that we can't change anybody else. We can change ourselves. But if you do want to help someone else see their biases, you have to do it gently, because none of us like being attacked. None of us like having the finger pointed at us. But we are mostly open if people come alongside us and ask questions about why we think the way we do, why we've made that decision.
You remind me of some other training that I went through with the Dale Carnegie people. And I ended up becoming a group leader. And one of the things we were cautioned to be aware of is not to be giving people advice or sanctioning anything that was derogatory. Because one of the common things is common with what you said in many ways is when people are going through an experiential training program like the Dale Carnegie training, they see all of the other people elevating themselves and see, wow, this one's really doing well. This one's great. And they've really come a long way. I haven't done anything. And the reason being is that we live with ourselves 7/24 or 24/7, right?
Yes.
And we're looking from these and they see nothing's changed really until somebody says something to us.
Yeah, that's right. And for me, that comes back to sometimes we have biases against ourselves. We have ingrained attitudes around what we can or can't achieve because of our age, maybe because of our gender or our life experience. And I'll give you an example of this. I started this business when I was 60. And for probably a good 2 or maybe even 3 years, I wasn't making the progress that I wanted. I knew I had a great idea. People were starting to get a feel for it. Yes, it's a lovely idea, Bron. But it wasn't until I got a business coach, and I will certainly say how important business coaches are, and she started to listen to the things that I was saying about myself, largely around my age. And she would say to me, Bron, age is just a number. And I'd go, yeah, because we all do that, don't we? Yeah, we know, cognitively we know it's right. It hasn't hit our heart yet. It hasn't made any changes. But I started to think, again, why do I feel like this? Why am I getting in my own way here? And as I looked at my family, now I'm the eldest in my family. Both of my siblings have already moved into semi-retirement. One has, building a house on the south coast of New South Wales. The other one is off, caravanning around Australia, the typical grey nomads. And here I was starting a business. It was like, you aren't doing the normal thing, Bron. You should be at 60 moving towards retirement. You should be, that horrible word should be slowing down. What do you think you are doing this? And that was like the light bulb. It was like, oh, I see in my family, this is what is normal for someone in their 60s. And I was going against the grain. Once I realized that I actually had an ageist bias against myself, how dumb is that? Getting in my own way. Once I recognized that, my business took off because I was no longer holding it back.
Right. So the biases, they sound like they're alive. And what I mean by that is they're malleable in a sense, because too young, I'm too old, I'm too tall, I'm too short, I'm too skinny, I'm too fat, I'm too white, I'm not white enough. All that stuff, right? We can hang into that dialogue in our own mind and hold ourselves back, or we can do what you did, found a way out and realized that your genius is not about being too old. Your genius is listening to what your heart's saying, right?
Absolutely. And I love the way that you put that our genius is within. Yeah. And it really has nothing to do with the externals. And that's why I like to talk with businesses about bias, because too often people in business, people in teams in business, it's the externals that are used to categorize people, to hold people back. Oh, that fat person's lazy. Oh, she's just a woman. What would she know? Oh, she's a baby boomer. Or, look at that millennial over there. We categorize people and we make assumptions about them around externals that have got nothing to do with the inner genius or everything that person can bring to the table.
Just a little while ago, talking about ages and restrictions and that bias. Just a few weeks back, I had a guest on who was 13. And if you were to say all 13-year-olds are all, he just turned 13 a few weeks earlier to that, but he was amazing. And if you look at some kids, they're watching and playing their games and doing all that stuff. Well, he does things around, he's a YouTube evaluator, he's a YouTuber, what he does. He's got his own website, which he created. He's passionate about photography, camping, and there's one other thing that he does, but I forgot at the moment. And he's helping people with their social media, YouTube, those sort of things. That might be the third thing. And if you were to categorize everybody with your bias, that at a certain age you've got to be, they're not doing anything, they're wasted, they're not working hard enough, they're not studying enough, they're not whatever that is for them. This young guy is a really good example of breaking that bias, because he's energetic, he's looking for possibilities, and I think he does play games, but he also is very goal focused and very entrepreneurial, and he's only like 13. It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah, no, and we make those assumptions really fast. Daniel Kahneman has a fantastic book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and he really was one of the first people to start to unlock this whole notion of unconscious bias, because he talks about that fast thinking, that assumption that we make, the preconceptions that we have about people based on, well, like with that young man, based on his age. Oh, he's 13, therefore, and you sort of fill in the blanks. Right. Whereas slow thinking allows us to stop, take a step back and go, okay, yes, he's 13 and he plays games, but what else can we find out about this person? Because Like, the reality is, we know that all of us are not two-dimensional. We have so much more to us than meets the eye, and yet we allow ourselves, in many ways, a luxury of just making assumptions about people because it's easy to do that.
You said the word "but," and "but" can be a good word, but usually it's not. But usually it's not. I just said it. That's ingrained in us, right? So what I'm working on, and have been for quite a long time, is changing the "but" to some other word, or just taking a pause. So in recent weeks, again, I've had an interesting experience. I've taken improv training, and improv is all about yes and, not yes but.
Yeah.
Yes but kills the humor. It kills the story. It doesn't go anywhere. The audiences, they're mad that they even spent the money. But good improvers say yes and let's do something else. So
Yes.
I was reminded about that a few weeks ago with being in a group coaching session with something that's totally not related to that, sort of. But the improv teacher is actually a teacher in a high school, and he does improv because that's what his passion is. And he brought improv into the school to teach his students how to have a yes and attitude versus
excellent.
a yes but, or well, that's no good idea. Because something I learned too in another program that I'm trained in, and we believe that in every idea, even if you don't agree with it, 10% of it's good.
Yes.
So you say 10% of it's good, and then add on to that, what ends up happening is you move around, you get rid of the biases, you turn on the creative process, and you become collaborators. And when you get to the end with the ideal solution, you forget who had the original idea, because it really doesn't matter.
That's right. That's right. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
This has been pretty interesting. So how do you, in like a 30 or 60-second commercial, how do you help people implement this in their lives?
Right. Good. Great question. I'm working with a variety of different organisations and businesses, from peak sporting bodies through government departments down to small business. And one of the things that I'm noticing, because this is in many ways a cutting edge for business, that's why I talk about bias as being the silver bullet that we need. So often businesses approach me with a real sense of trust that I am going to be able to deliver something for them. Many times they come and say, look, we just don't know what we don't know. And they know that they want to, they're starting to understand, particularly in the sporting arena, that bias exists and they want to address it, but they don't know how. One of the processes that I take individuals and businesses through is a 4-step process for identifying our biases, which starts with noticing the triggers. Now, for me on Nauru, the trigger that I noticed was my stomach churning and my shoulders tensing. That was, my body was telling me something. It was an unusual situation for me, and I took note. Now, a trigger might also be an emotional response, something like feeling frustrated with a situation or a person, maybe some anger rising up that is unusual for you. So it's important to notice those triggers, not to just dismiss them as unimportant, particularly the emotional ones, because we often don't like to notice our emotions because sometimes they get uncomfortable. But I have learned that when an emotion starts to rise in me, that gives me pause, because I think, okay, there is something happening in me that I'm not yet cognitively aware of. So triggers are hugely important. The second step then is to ask questions, to ask why. Why is this happening? What is going on in my body? What's been going on around me that's caused me to trigger in the way that I have? And for me on Nauru, it was to ask the question, well, why is my body doing that? I've not experienced that before. What is different about this situation? And it was hugely different. And that led me to thinking, All right. Oh, okay. There's a whole lot of people here who are really different to me. So that word difference started to percolate. So we notice the triggers. We ask ourselves some questions, and then we start to explore the stories or narratives. And for me, that was a natural progression from going, oh, difference. Well, what's from where I've grown up? Did I have lots of difference in my life? And I realized, no, I didn't. I went to school with everybody who was white like me. I think we had one Chinese family at our church. English was everywhere. Most people went to church. People were just like me. And so I started to realize and looked back over on my parents weren't overtly racist at all. I would have said I didn't have a racist bone in my body. But I realised that being the same as everybody else was really important to my parents, not, being normal, being compliant, fitting within societal norms. And I realised that somewhere along the line I'd learnt the difference was a threat. So I looked at the narratives, the stories that were in my family in my growing up years. And that then helped me to go, oh, well, maybe this is actually, if I'm mixing with races that are different here, different cultures, maybe, just maybe, there's a racist bias here. And that's not comfortable. And look, I get it when, because some of the objections that come back to me from business is, this sort of training doesn't work, we're doing it online, or particularly that they're concerned that uncomfortable things will come up for their employees and for their staff. And yes, there is that. Sometimes things will come up that are uncomfortable, that we don't like about ourselves. But it's really important to be able to see those things. I don't believe that at heart, that I believe most of us are good at heart. There's no really deep, dark, scary monsters dwelling within. And if you allow people to explore their biases in a safe environment with a facilitator who's been there, done that, and is continuing to do the process, then you've got a safe environment for people to be able to do that ongoing process. Because working with our biases is not one-off. It is like riding a bike. When we were a kid, we didn't just decide after that first fall off, grazed knee, that bike riding didn't work. We got back on and we tried again. And it's the same with working with our biases, because we will fall back at different times into default ways of thinking. That's when you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and you go on again.
So I put your website up here, so in case people wanted to find out more about you. Is there an introduction process that you have for them that you point them to, or where's the best place to go?
Yeah, certainly. Send me an email at info@bronwilliams.com. That's probably the easiest way. And because the very first thing that I love to be able to do with people is to talk about, where are they at the moment? Why are they looking at bias? What are some of the things that they want to change in their business, in their company, in their organisation? And then that allows me to tailor a program that is suitable for them. But we always start with my introductory webinar or presentation, depending on whether it's virtual or in person. And that's called What's Your Water? Because we have to start at the beginning of looking at what's the water that we're swimming in?
Right.
And start asking those questions of ourselves.
So I put your website up so people get an idea what to look for, make sure that the right spot, that they've typed it in right. And if they've got it wrong, they won't get your lovely photo up here, and the bias specialist won't not appear. So be careful when you're typing the website in so that you can get to Bron and get connected and learn a little bit more about what's the water you're swimming in.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, it's a good question.
So you could help them identify that. So I invite everybody to go and do that. I want to thank you for taking the time. I know that it's kind of early in the day for you, and it's midday for me. So I'm grateful that you were able to be on our show today on the Business Renovator.
It's been wonderful to be here, Phil, and thank you for your questions, because questions draw out so much from us. They're so powerful.
Again, thank you. So think about that. You're a fish in the water, and you're the last one to figure out that you're in the water. I'm going to ponder that for the next few days, I think. Anyway, thank you for being here. If you like what you heard on the Business Renovator, share this out with other people. If there's somebody that you know that's similar to Bron or has a different story that you would like to help get their message out, reach out to me at phil@coachphil.ca. Let me know, and let's get them on the show, because you never know what's the one thing that they could share in the world that would have a huge impact on somebody they may never meet. So if you want to help people in that regard, there's a place to do it. I want to bring up one piece of content here that I'm a big fan of, and it's this word here, wonderful. And the U is in wonderful on purpose, because you are wonderful. Go act like it. Just be yourself. See you next time on the Business Renovator.
I get shit done, I have fun. It's my time and I'm the one. I'm breaking through.